So this is going to be a video on how I record music, how I get my sounds, how I mix, how I produce, how I master. So if anybody has any of these questions, I usually am going to refer them to this video. So hello if you're coming from a referral like that. And I'm not going to waste any time, so let's just go right ahead. First thing I wanted to show people was my amp, because I get a lot of questions on how I get my guitar tones. And the problem is a lot of it are presets that come specifically with this amp, which is a Volvatronic Pro. Almost all of the instruments I have are instruments that my parents owned and I borrowed and ended up keeping, or were gifts in the first place, or something like that. These are not how I set the knobs normally. I have presets that I use, but basically this amp comes with effects already. Like if you look down here, there is a fuzz effect right at the bottom there. And that's what I used to get the Muse sound. That's what I used in the Royal Blood video. And basically I can't really go into detail on how I get that sound, because I mean I literally I get a somewhat distorted sound, and then I set the fuzz on, and then just... I will say one major thing that I do specifically to get most of my sounds is this here. I'm assuming most of you know what it is if you're watching a video like this, but this determines which pickups your guitar is using. So if it's set all the way to the bottom, it uses a pickup in the back, and it basically just gives different tones based on what you're going for. So I always leave mine straight down about 99% of the time, unless I'm going for something really, really smooth that I want like a clean, silky sound. But if I'm ever doing distortion, I always have it set all the way to the bottom. This will make your sound really like high-pitched and whiny, but I prefer the way it sounds with distortion. So the way I compensate for that is I turn up the bass a little bit on my amp, and then I have it set all the way down to the bottom, and then it ends up with the fuzz sound that I get here. So again, I'm not going to go too much into detail on how I do all the guitar stuff, because there's only so much you can say when it's mostly presets doing the work. But I messed around like a year ago with these sounds, and I just ended up coming up with these few, and these are just the ones I use in most of my songs because I like how they sound already. Another reason I forgot to mention of why I like to use the high-end guitar sounds is because it leaves room in the mix for the bass to breathe. That's something that happens a lot, is when you get a complicated mix, when you have like 50 tracks playing throughout the song, sounds can start to bleed into each other and overlap, and if you have a low-end guitar sound that sounds really deep, mixed with a bass sound that also sounds really deep, sometimes they can blend together, and I like keeping them distinct because you can hear them individually. That's maybe a personal preference, but that's how I do it. Also, if you guys like the shirts, I'll link them in the description. So now on to how I record. So I found this mic in my dad's room about a few years ago, and I asked him if I could use it. He used it for work, and he said yes, and I ended up keeping it. It's only about $100. And it's what I use for every single thing that I record. This is a blue Yeti. It comes with a few different settings on the back here, and this is really important. I almost always keep it on cardioid. So you see this little heart shape here? That basically means that it's only accepting sound from right in front of it, or mostly from right in front of it. Or if you have it set to something like this one, it's going to pick up all the ambient noise in the room. So you want to make sure you have this set properly when you're trying to record a specific amp. I usually keep the gain pretty low and then turn up the guitar amp to compensate for that. So the way I record, a lot of people use something called an audio interface, and what that is, it's basically like you set up a little box here, you'd have it sitting here next to your computer, and you plug in all of your instruments to that, and you get direct sound into your computer, and that's how you get really high quality sound usually. But because I don't have that, I had a workaround where I would just stick my mic right here under my computer desk, and then I play my guitar and record the parts into Cubase. Oh my goodness, what the? He just jumped up there. So I'd record the parts onto Cubase, which we'll get to next. I'd do everything on this mic. So I'd do the bass, the guitar, the vocals, and then any extra stuff on top of that I would record on the mic. So everything is on that mic. Now let's open Cubase. So I get a lot of people ask me which program I use. So I use Cubase 9.5 Artist. And if you go to Steinberg and you search for the educational version, if you're a student, you can get a a large discount on the program. It's still very expensive. I think it ends up being about $200, but for me, it's been totally worth it because I've used this for years to record every single song I've ever done. So much better than GarageBand, so many capabilities. Let's see, I guess we'll go into the Creep Muse thing that I just recorded. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a couple of tricks here. So number one, here is the arpeggiating piano that is played throughout all the verses in this video that I did. So here's what it sounds like. So that sounds pretty like snazzy, you know? But if you take away some of the effects I had on it, it might sound a little more bland. A good way to get around crappy MIDI sounds, which MIDI basically is just like a fake instrument on the computer, is to get a lot of reverb on it. And I know that's a very cheap way to get around it because it's still gonna sound like crap with reverb, but it does wash out the sound and make it sound a lot more real. So if you take away some of this reverb, this is what it sounded like before. That's what it sounds like without any effects. And there's a huge difference there in terms of quality and atmosphere. I know not every song warrants a ton of reverb, but if you can allow it to fit into your song, it can make these fake instruments sound a lot more effective. The second tip is that if you're using guitar in a rock setting, almost always you're going to want it to sound big because that's the whole point of a distorted rock guitar. The way I get around having only one mono mic, this is mono because it only is recording from one direction, so it doesn't sound like your guitar is coming from multiple directions and giving it a very wide sound. It gives it a very narrow sound. The way you get around that, and this is somewhat of a cheap production technique, but some bands use it consistently because they have multiple guitarists, but what I do is I record the same guitar part twice, or sometimes even more than twice, and I pan one. Panning is basically when you send an audio signal in a certain direction on the speaker. So if you look here, this yellow guitar that I used is panned all the way to the right, and this other yellow guitar is panned all the way to the left, and they're both playing the same exact thing. So what that does is it makes it sound like your guitar is massive. So this is what it sounds like with one. And this is what it sounds like with two. Not sure how that's coming through on this particular camera mic, but it makes such a huge difference in the mix. What it does do also though is it suffocates the vocals and stuff. It makes it harder to hear other instruments because these are so overpowering. It becomes difficult to level everything at times when you have all these guitars blaring at once. Another question I get consistently asked is how do you do the drums on your music? So let's start with this. Let's say I want to do a drum beat like doons, doons, doons. Let's see, we got the right tempo. All right, that's perfect. Now we gotta go to Studio, VST Instruments, Add Rack Instrument, Groove Agent SE. Now we have Groove Agent open. And Groove Agent is the thing that I use to make all of my drum beats. So now we are in the MIDI editor. Oh, I forgot, I have to pick a preset. So I love to use the same preset every time. Not because it's the best thing to do, but because it's easy and I like the sound that comes with Rock Kit 3. So I picked that one and then got all these sounds to work with. I pretty much memorized where all of the parts are, but basically the low C here is the kick drum. I think that's the drum beat I said, right? Basically, I'm just playing around until I get in the right spots. I think that's right. Yep, there we go. And then to accent it, you put a snare, you put a crash there. You usually want to put a hi-hat every 8th note. So let me do that real quick. There's the basic drum beat, and then you can copy and paste that for the rest of the song. I'm going to move this down here because you don't really want to crash playing every 2 seconds. So that does sound a little bit robotic. So a way you can fix that, you highlight every other hi-hat sound, usually on the off 8th note, And here, I'll show you what I mean. So you see right there, I've highlighted every single other eighth note not on the downbeats. And then you lower the velocity those are played. Basically, that lowers the volume of those notes. And that'll give the drums a more real sound. So this is set to every 16th note that it will lock in place. So you see if I move it there, it'll just lock that there. Now we could set this to like triplets. So if we did that, we could get some cool drum fills. So let me fill one of those in quick. So there you go, you can just fill in drum beats. It just takes some practice to get used to working with a program like this. Now I'll take you into one of my projects that has some of the craziest drums because there's a lot of extra added production into it. It's also a 6-minute long song on my album The Abyss. Buy now. Hey kitty. He loves to just sit on my desk all day. This is a ton of little production techniques you can use. Let's see how big this project is. All right, we have 51 tracks. So let's zoom out and see what it looks like. So this is the craziness that is this 6-minute long song. It's all this stuff playing. So some of the little tricks that I use in this song is, for example, I have these snaps going. So here's me doing snaps. I did not copy these three tracks of me snapping and then just make 3 versions of it. I recorded each of these individually. And then you also add some inserts onto stuff like this. I added a compressor and some reverb, and these 2 things make it so that the snaps aren't randomly crazy different volumes and so that they sound like they're in a bigger room. I add compressors to almost everything. The main thing you do not add compressors to, or at least I don't, is distorted guitar, because by nature, a distorted guitar is already compressed. Compressed just means you're shoving down the audio file so that it's more consistent. So this is what a normal distorted guitar looks like. And it's really obvious. That doesn't need any compression, so I don't add any there. Another thing you can do is add something called EQ. So what EQ does is mutes and emphasizes different frequencies. So if you see here, this is an EQ of the acoustic guitar that is playing right now. And because I don't want the low end of the acoustic guitar, I don't want it to be like a really bassy acoustic guitar. I just want it to be an emphasis on what is already being played. I boosted up here. A lot of this comes in presets, so I just hit load. You know, you can load different settings. Like there's a strummed acoustic guitar option already. So if I wanted it to be like all super high end, like high pitch sound, then I could just mute all the low end and then it would just sound like that. Or I could get all the bass up a ton and hear almost all bass. There are a lot of cool things you can do with it. Like let's say I wanted my vocals to stick out more. I would turn down the EQ here on all of the guitar parts, and then on the vocal part, I would maybe even turn this exact 345 hertz, I would turn this up. So that would let that stick through the mix a little bit more. Also, a little other trick is if you hear background noise coming from somewhere, like let's say there's a lot of string noise that's just coming through and fret noise and you don't want that there. You can search here using a finely tuned EQ thingy to hear where the obnoxious sound is coming from. And when you find it, then you just cut that out and then that's gone. So that's another awesome tip. Oh, forgot to cover some of the drums here. So you can listen how complicated some of these MIDI drums can get. I mean, I have all the stuff playing in the song in the background. So it can get pretty crazy real fast. I'll do a more in-depth video on recording in the future probably, if enough people are requesting it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this and I hope it was helpful at some point. Thanks for watching.